My freshman history class once took a field trip to this military museum in our city. There were about 3 other classes attending, as every history class would be taking a field trip there, with 3 classes going per day. My history teacher was Mr. Shannon. Mr. Shannon was a young guy in his 20s who was just a really chill teacher, and even more chill not in a classroom setting. Everyone in the class was given a clipboard with a fill-in-the-blank style worksheet clipped to it, with around 30 questions. We were expected to answer all of the questions to receive full credit for the assignment. The questions were on various artifacts and displays in different rooms of the museum that Mr. Shannon was leading us through. About 20 minutes in, me and my best friend Ian, who was also in my class, were getting extremely bored. Ian was texting his friend Ash, a guy I wasn't too familiar with, but seemed chill. He was in a separate class from us, but also on the field trip, so he was somewhere else in the museum. After finding out Ash's location, which was in one of the living history areas, me and Ian were able to sneak away from the group as Mr. Shannon was leading them into the next room. We figured we'd get the answers to the assignment from another classmate later on. Ian and I were making our way through various rooms to the opposite side of the museum where the living history exhibitions were. The whole place was extremely dimly lit as to preserve the artifacts, I guess. At some point while we were walking through one room, I noticed what looked like a head peering at us from around a wall, but as soon as I focused on it, it vanished. Seeing this gave me a really bad feeling, like in my stomach. I asked Ian if he saw it, but he hadn't. I wanted to go over there to see who it was, but Ian urged me to just keep walking. We weren't even into the next room when I was overcome with that really dreadful feeling again. I started glancing around and saw for a split second someone ducking behind a glass case farther behind us. I was paranoid that maybe a teacher was onto us, so I told Ian and we just started moving faster. Eventually we made it to the living history exhibitions. Ash was standing right by the doorway. We decided to just walk through the exhibitions and take pictures with the mannequins and stuff. You'd never think of a museum being creepy, but the living history area just consisted of a bunch of long, winding hallways with a lot of creepy soldier mannequins that looked like they were alive and could jump at you at any second. Not to mention the place was really dark. Ian was just taking a picture of me and Ash messing with this one soldier mannequin, when behind Ian I could clearly see once again someone peeking around a corner at us. Ash spoke up before I did. "Yo, who's over there?" The head disappeared behind the corner. "You think it's a teacher?" I asked. "Maybe," Ash said. "Let's go see." And he started walking towards where the head had been. I followed close behind, and Ian was behind me. When we rounded the corner, there was no one in sight, just a dark, empty hallway. I told him that if it was a teacher, they probably would have said something to us. We all agreed it was creepy and we should probably get back to our classes. We started moving towards the exit when I realized I had left my sunglasses back in the exhibit. I had put them on the soldier mannequin when me and Ash were getting a picture with it. I told them to wait there and I jogged back to the soldier mannequin. As I was putting my sunglasses back in my pocket, I suddenly got that really horrible, dreadful feeling again. It was just a feeling of pure anxiety that made my stomach sick. "Hello?" I called out. "Hey kid, come over here." I turned around. Standing about 10 feet away, once again peering from around a wall, was a head. I could see him more clearly now. He looked terrifying. He was an older, bald man. One detail I clearly remembered about his face was his teeth. More than half of them seemed to be missing. Then he pulled his head back behind the wall. All I could do was stay rooted to the spot out of awe as he stuck one leg out and then jumped entirely out from behind the wall, as if he was a cartoon character making an entrance. He was smiling widely and moving quickly towards me, but in a weird, playful manner, like a cartoon character. But his whole demeanor was just off-putting. Something about his clothes and his face were just really off-putting. He was about 6 feet away from me when I turned around and started speed walking away. He yelled for me to come back, but I ignored him and made my way back to my friends. As they walked towards the front of the museum with me, I told them what I saw. They both laughed and said he sounded like a psycho. Eventually, we made it back to the classes congregating just at the front of the museum. Our teachers were so busy sorting kids into lines to get ready to board the buses that they didn't even notice me and my friends walking up alone. Just as Mr. Shannon sorted me into our class's line to start walking out, I turned around and took one last look, and I saw him. He was leaning over the railing a few stories up, just looking down and watching the classes. It was then I realized he looked dirty as hell, like he was homeless. Then we left through the doors and got on all the buses. I didn't tell any of the teachers about it or anything, and neither did my friends. For all we knew, that guy could have been a museum employee or something. It seems unlikely, but otherwise I'm not sure how he could have gotten in there. The whole place was supposed to be empty apart from our school's field trip, and there was a lot of security in the main lobby. I guess I'll never really know. I'm just glad I trusted my gut on walking away from him, because the fact he had been following us that entire time couldn't mean anything good. What you're about to hear is a very brief, but very disturbing memory from my childhood, from an age where this is the only memory I can clearly remember and recount to this day. I had to have been like 7 or 8. My parents and I were visiting Washington, D.C. for about a week. One afternoon, after walking around the city, my parents wanted to go to the Smithsonian Natural History Museum. Museums didn't excite me much, but it wasn't like I had a choice. So for some context, when I was younger, I had some social issues. I won't go too into detail about it just because it's always been embarrassing for me to talk about, let alone sharing it with the internet. But one thing I would often do as a result of my issues was when I was upset, instead of trying to verbally communicate my feelings, I would often do abrupt and rigid things to try and find satisfaction. So after being at the museum for around 20 minutes, surrounded by hundreds of strangers, which was very intimidating for me at that age, and my parents just dragging me to exhibit after exhibit, I eventually just stormed off into the crowd. I found a water fountain and drank from it, then sat on a bench. After taking a minute to cool off, I planned to go find my parents, but I couldn't remember where I had come from. My 8-year-old self then thought it was a good idea to climb the staircase to the next floor to try and spot my parents from above, so that's what I did. When I got to the second floor, after looking over the railing for my parents a while, I realized I had stumbled into some fossil exhibit. This distracted me. I was walking up and down the hallways looking at all the giant dinosaur fossils, my imagination running wild. I was mainly glancing up above me at the huge dinosaurs towering over me, when at some point I looked down and saw a man in front of me. He was sitting off in a dark corner on a bench facing me. I can still picture him clearly. He was sitting on a bench with his whole body facing me, hands clasped neatly, wearing a blue shirt, cargo shorts, and a black baseball cap. Instinctively, I stopped and made eye contact with him. He stared at me for a few seconds, looking like he was deep in thought. It should be noted that there was literally no one else around, something I was aware of at the time, but still didn't alarm me in any way. The man stood up and started walking towards me, and stopped about 10 feet away. I wasn't scared. For all I knew, I had no reason to be. Then he spoke. "Hey, where are your parents?" I replied shyly, I don't know." He paused for a second, then motioned for me to come towards him. He said something along the lines of how he'd help me find my parents and to follow him. I figured that was that. Without giving it any second thought, as he turned around and started walking away, I followed him from behind. He led me out of the fossil hall and through a few other large exhibits with little to no people around. Then he walked up to some door in the wall. I vividly remember him glancing around before he pushed it open and held it, quickly ushering me inside. We were in some long white hallway with an aluminum floor and dim fluorescent lights. Even at the time, I could tell it was some kind of employee area, which made me uncomfortable. He closed the big, heavy door and walked past me, saying to keep going. We walked to the end of the hall, and then he started opening another big, heavy door. As he was doing this, I could hear traffic noises and the sounds of the city outside. I took a peek through the door as daylight flooded in, and I saw it led to the outside of the museum. At this point, I was growing really uncomfortable. I can't exactly explain it, but I had some sort of feeling like I shouldn't be with this man. My emotions took over and I turned around and started walking back down the hall where we had come from. He yelled something after me, but I didn't turn around. Then I heard him approaching me from behind quickly, so I broke into a run and made it to the door we entered from. As I was opening it, I took one last look back, and I saw the man running the opposite direction and fleeing through the door to the outside. I didn't think much more about it. I wandered back into the fossil hall, where a bunch of employees instantly ran up to me and asked me to where my parents were. I said I didn't know, and they all crowded around me and started escorting me down to the first floor, where my parents were. My mom was already having a breakdown, sitting on a bench and crying uncontrollably. This made me cry as well. They embraced me and scolded me, and after a while we left the museum and went for lunch or something. I don't know why, but I never said a word about what happened. I guess I was just too young and naive to think any of it was really a big deal. I had gotten upset when the man tried to lure me outside, so I just left the situation, like I always did. It wasn't until years later that this memory came back to me, and I realized how sinister the whole thing really was. I work at a museum in the San Francisco Peninsula. I won't be revealing the name of the museum because of privacy reasons, but it's a fairly old art museum which displays art ranging from the 17th century to the modern age. My job mainly consists of sanitation and routine maintenance checks, and I've been working there for nearly a year now. I'll start off by describing something that happened about 3 months back. I was working the closing shift. I believe there were around 5 other people working that shift, the 2 ladies at the front desk and the rest were security. The other 2 custodians who were supposed to be on shift hadn't turned up. I don't know why, I just know they definitely weren't there because that entire shift I went without seeing them. Anyways, I was cleaning out one of the bathroom stalls some kid had had an accident in when all of a sudden the lights went out. Naturally, the first thing I did was walk to the bathroom door to peek outside and check if the whole building had lost power, but the door wouldn't budge. It didn't have a lock on it, so something must have been blocking it. This confused me. I radioed on my walkie-talkie for someone to come to the East Wing bathrooms and try the door from the other side, but I got no response. I was trying the walkie-talkie over and over when it suddenly hit me the temperature there had gone down like 5 degrees, and there was a gust of cold air rushing from behind me. Then, just like that, the lights flicked back on. I walked back over to the door and sure enough, it pushed open. I noticed the door handle on the other side of the door was freezing cold. I was a bit creeped out, but I did my best to carry on with my job. Not even 2 days later, I was once again working the closing shift. I was on my break, so I was just eating a sandwich in the break room and looking at my phone. Then I felt a cold gust of air again, and out of nowhere, my walkie-talkie burst into a deafening static. It got annoying quickly, so I took it out to change the channel, when I swear to God I heard a woman's voice coming through the walkie-talkie over the static. I couldn't make out what she was saying, but it gave me chills. I switched the channel and that was that. It couldn't have been any of my coworkers because all of the people working at that time were males, with distinct voices I would have recognized. I guess now is the best time to say yes. It's rumored that the museum is haunted. I've heard a few stories from other coworkers before of strange happenings and paranormal activity, etc. But personally, having never experienced anything there for almost a year, I didn't dwell on these rumors. I told one of the other security guys the 2 things I had witnessed, and he laughed, saying I hadn't experienced the worst of it until the ghost tried to throw something at me. Well, something much more terrifying ended up happening. I hadn't seen anything weird for about another month apart from the occasional odd noise. Then, one Wednesday night, I was working the closing shift again. There were 3 security guards and 2 other custodians on shift during this. I had been radioed to respond to a broken light bulb in one of the older art exhibits. Apparently, it had just blown up a few minutes before I was called there. As soon as I walked in, I was hit with that signature cold gust of wind. I almost turned around and left when suddenly a light bulb in the corner exploded. I ducked for cover behind a glass case as every light bulb in the room began exploding one by one. I radioed what was going on when I heard something slamming on the glass case. I looked up to see a fresh handprint on the glass. I noped the fuck out of there. As soon as I left, I ran into 2 other custodians coming down the hall after hearing my call. I told them what happened and said I wasn't going back in there. One of them went in, and after he was in there for about a minute without incident, the rest of us joined him. The rest of our shift was occupied with cleaning up that mess. That just happened, and I've seriously been considering quitting. That last incident could have seriously injured me or one of my coworkers. I never really believed in ghosts until all of this started happening, but I have felt some seriously malevolent energy in that museum, especially around the older artifacts, and especially at night.